The story of the Collyer Brothers is a fascinating yet tragic tale of isolation, obsession, and extreme hoarding. It serves as a window into the psychology of compulsion and the dark side of urban life in the early 20th century. Although slightly outside the 19th century, the story's origins and the brothers' lifestyle are deeply rooted in that era. The discovery of their hoarded mansion in 1947 shocked the nation and became one of the most infamous cases of hoarding in history. Homer Lusk Collyer, born in 1881, and Langley Wakeman Collyer, born in 1885, were born into a well-to-do family in New York City. Their father, Dr. Herman Livingston Collyer, was a prominent gynecologist, and their mother, Susie Gage Frost Collyer, was a former opera singer. The family lived in a 4-story brownstone at 2078 Fifth Avenue in Harlem, a neighborhood that was affluent at the time. The Collyer brothers were well educated and came from a lineage that boasted wealth and social standing. Homer attended Columbia University, where he earned a degree in law, while Langley studied engineering and chemistry at the same institution. The brothers were considered intelligent and capable, but their lives took a drastic turn after the deaths of their parents. After their father's death in 1923 and their mother's death in 1929, Homer and Langley became increasingly reclusive. They retreated into their family home and gradually cut off contact with the outside world. Over time, they began to develop strange and obsessive behaviors, particularly Langley, who became the primary caregiver for his older brother Homer. Homer, who suffered from rheumatism, eventually lost his eyesight around 1933. Langley, dedicated to caring for his brother, became increasingly paranoid and distrustful of outsiders. He feared that people would try to break into their home and steal their possessions. To protect themselves and their home, Langley began hoarding massive amounts of items, believing that everything had potential value or use. The brothers' hoarding spiraled out of control. Langley collected newspapers, books, furniture, musical instruments, and a variety of other items, including junk that he found on the streets of New York City. He believed that he could cure Homer's blindness with a diet of oranges and a daily regimen of playing piano music. Langley also saved newspapers because he intended to read them to Homer when he regained his sight. As the years passed, the Collyer mansion became increasingly cluttered and hazardous. The house was packed floor to ceiling, with everything from newspapers and rotting food to broken furniture and various gadgets. Langley, who rarely left the house except to collect more items, became adept at navigating through the narrow, cluttered pathways he had created within the home. He also set up booby traps to protect against intruders, further complicating the layout of the mansion. Neighbors and passers-by noticed the increasingly dilapidated state of the mansion. The windows were often boarded up, and there were rumors about the brothers' odd behavior. Despite this, the Collyers refused to allow anyone inside their home, and they paid their bills in cash to avoid contact with utility companies. Over time, the brothers became local legends, with wild stories circulating about their eccentric lifestyle. The situation came to a head in March 1947 when a neighbor reported a foul odor emanating from the Collyer mansion. Fearing that something terrible had happened, the police were called to investigate. When officers arrived at the property, they found the front door blocked by a wall of junk. After failing to gain entry, they were forced to break in through a second-story window. What the authorities found inside the Collyer mansion shocked even the most seasoned officers. The house was an impenetrable labyrinth of junk and debris. Narrow tunnels, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, wound their way through rooms packed with garbage, newspapers, and a bizarre assortment of items. It took hours for the police to navigate the maze-like interior. On March 21, 1947, after digging through the clutter, the police discovered the body of Homer Collyer. He was found sitting in a decaying armchair surrounded by piles of newspapers and other debris. Authorities initially assumed that Langley was either missing or had fled, so they continued to search the house for him. The search continued for several more days, during which time workers removed tons of junk from the mansion. Finally, on March 30th, 1947, Langley's body was discovered just 10 feet away from where Homer had been found. He had been crushed under a collapsed pile of debris, likely one of his own booby traps, and had died from asphyxiation. The authorities concluded that Langley had died first, and without his brother's care, Homer had soon succumbed to starvation. The discovery of the Collyer brothers' bodies and the state of their home became front-page news across the country. The press dubbed them the Hermit Hoarders and the Ghosts of Harlem. Over the next several weeks, workers removed over 100 tons of junk from the mansion, including 14 grand pianos, countless newspapers, and thousands of books. The house was so unstable that it was eventually condemned and demolished later that year. Among the items recovered were an X-ray machine, a horse's jawbone, bundles of old newspapers dating back decades, and a Model T Ford chassis, which Langley had planned to convert into an electricity generator. The sheer volume and diversity of the items they hoarded fascinated the public and led to widespread speculation about the brothers' mental state. The story of the Collyer brothers became a cultural touchstone, representing the extreme consequences of social isolation and hoarding. Psychologists, journalists, and the public alike were intrigued by how two intelligent and once prominent men could descend into such a bizarre and tragic lifestyle. The case of the Collyer brothers has been studied extensively in the context of mental health, particularly regarding obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and hoarding disorder. Modern psychologists might classify Langley's behavior as symptomatic of severe hoarding disorder, which is now recognized as a distinct condition in the DSM-5, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Hoarding disorder is characterized by the persistent difficulty in discarding or parting with possessions, regardless of their actual value, due to a perceived need to save them. Langley's actions can also be understood in the context of his brotherly devotion. His obsessive hoarding was, in part, motivated by his desire to care for Homer and protect him from the outside world. This protective instinct, coupled with his growing paranoia, drove him to accumulate more and more items, eventually leading to the catastrophic conditions in their home. Homer's situation was equally tragic. Once a vibrant and educated man, he became entirely dependent on his brother after losing his sight and mobility. His fate was inextricably tied to Langley's compulsions, and he ultimately paid the price for his brother's deteriorating mental state. The story of the Collyer brothers has left a lasting legacy, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of extreme hoarding and social isolation. Their case has been referenced in literature, film, and television, often as a symbol of the grotesque and the bizarre. In 1954, the play, The Collyer Brothers, by Michael McClure premiered, drawing inspiration from their lives. The brothers have also been the subject of numerous books and documentaries that explore the psychological and social aspects of their story. The term Collier's Mansion has become a colloquial term used by firefighters and emergency responders to describe a residence so cluttered with hoarded items that it poses a significant danger to those inside. The Collyer brothers' home was a death trap, not only for themselves, but also for anyone who tried to enter, and the legacy of their hoarding has had a practical impact on how such cases are handled today.